Hello. Welcome everyone. There's more seats in the front if you want to take a seat. So welcome to our panel. We're launching today Marta Jovanović's book, Performing the Self, written by Kathleen Madden. My name is Naomi Lev. I'm the director and curator of the gallery. And before we start introducing all of our panelists, I would like to thank the Martin E. Siegel Theater Center in Cooney, New York for co-publishing the book, Performing the Self. And so here are our panelists. Kathy Battista is the curator of the show and the author of the book. And she's a director of contemporary art at Sotheby's Institute of Art in New York, as well as senior research fellow of the Center for Global Futures in Art, Design, and Media at the Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton. She is author of Renegotiating the Body, Feminist Artists in 1970s London, and New York New Wave. She's also co-author of Art in New York and Recent Architecture in the Netherlands. Her essays have appeared in many edited collections, such as Ladies and Gents, Public Toilets and Gender, Arcade, Artists and Placemaking, and many more. She's also a regular contributor to journals Art Monthly, Art Untitled, The Brooklyn Rail, and RES Art World, as well as Faden.com. Kathleen Madden is an art historian and writer living in New York City, and as she writes, but she previously lived in London, where she was the commissioning editor of contemporary art books at Faden Press, for whom she edited Vitamin PH, New Perspective in Photography, and Ice Cream, Contemporary Art and Culture. She also created shows at Tate Modern, the Barbican, and the Serpentine Gallery in London. She teaches at the Sotheby's Institute of Art and for Barnard College, Columbia University, and is presently editing the Performer 13 book, creating a show in Istanbul, and writes regularly for Artforum and other international publications. And last but not least, Marta Jovanović is an artist, performance artist, born in Belgrade, Serbia, alumna of Tulane University, Scuola Lorenzo di Medici, A program of the Bronx Museum, and Emerge NYC, Hemispheric Art Institute, NYU. Her works have been presented in solo and group exhibition around the globe in institutions such as G12 Hub, Belgrade, Location 1, New York. Can you hear? Location 1, New York. Museo della Civiltà Romana, Rome. The Centre Culturel de Serbi, Paris, among many others. Jovanović is the winner of the Roma Capitale Award in 2012 and participated at the Bronx Museum Biennale in 2013, as well as the Venice Agenda at the 55th Venice Biennale. She lives and works in New York, Belgrade, and Rome. This is her third exhibition in New York. Do you want to start? Oh, I'm just going to say that Marta is going to present herself a little bit and her works, and then we're going to have a conversation, and later we'll have time for a Q&A, so if you're thinking about any urgent questions, we'll leave them to the end and we'll have time to talk about them.
Well, good evening. Thank you all so much for coming here. It's a real endurance performance that you're here, considering the climate outside. It is really my pleasure to be here tonight and to present the book that Katya and I worked really hard on, and that made us actually really good friends. Almost more than that. Katya became my family in the United States, practically. So the nature of my work is very autobiographical, and I guess that's one of the reasons why people that I work with, I can't say usually, but sometimes become very close. I am today mostly performance artist, but I was trained as a classical painter. I studied in Italy, in Florence, as well as in the United States. And I paint, I draw, I use photography and video in my work as well. But about 6-7 years ago, I met in Rome a very famous performer, in Europe at least, Jan Fabre, and his troupe, they're from Belgium. And I had a collaboration with them, and that's when I actually realized the full potential of the body in space. And that's how I kind of threw myself into performance mostly, not to say only. So I will be happy to answer your questions, but I'm sure that those who don't know my work at all will find out about it now through this conversation.
Hello, Kathy. Would you like to begin and address Marta with some questions you were curious about?
Sure. Sorry. Well, I'll just say that, again, thank you so much for everyone for coming out in this weather, because I know it's not easy. Last week I was on a panel in LA that was outside and we were freezing, and this weekend we're freezing inside, and as I said, it's interesting. Anyway, I as Marta said, we have worked so closely together in this book, and it was really an honor to be part of it, and to kind of see the range, so much of her work that she has. And so when we did the show, I really wanted to focus on some of the things related to Serbia and the change that has gone on there from, former socialist Yugoslavia to Serbia, because I remember when a lot of that stuff was happening, and I lived in London, and I didn't understand it very well, and I only understood it through the media. And so meeting someone who lived there, and especially an artist practitioner, it was so fascinating to learn more about it from a very personal point of view. And there's a lot of the personal in this work. Marta's grandparents, her story, lots of stuff that I'm sure we'll talk about. But I guess one of my first questions to you, Marta, would be coming from that culture, and then I know we've talked a bit about your first forays into New York. How much do you think of this work translates into this culture? How much of it is universal and how much of it is specific?
It's really hard for me to say that because I'm coming from there, so sometimes I'm surprised with how people read my work, because we just had that when Kathleen walked into the gallery and we started talking about one of the works in the show, and it was, it's a long story now to tell you, but it was wonderful how when you are so much into what you're doing, and then someone comes with a comment that, with a completely different perspective, and you get surprised, like, wow, I never thought it could be read that way. So I like to leave my work to interpretation. I wouldn't show my work if I didn't feel that the audience is very important to me. So I also like when other meanings and layers of other meanings are attached to the work.
One of the other things that, I don't know how much it comes across in this show, but part of the reason Marta and I are interested in each other is this interest as well in the crossover between art and fashion. And I think that so much about fashion is about identity, and so much of your work is about identity. And what I'm really fascinated in is which artists you were looking at. I know we've talked about this before. Who has inspired you? Because you're so generous about collaborating with others in your work, and it's really, you're such an open person to work with. But who are the artists that kind of came before you that you were looking at when you were starting out?
Well, there are two particular women artists in whose work, or by whose work, I am really fascinated, and those are Hannah Wilke and Carly Schneemann. And what I appreciate mostly in their work, maybe that has nothing to do with fashion, but is the use of their bodies in the work. So, but going back to your fashion question, I don't know if I'm so interested in fashion. I actually, I love fashion. I think it's very, very interesting. But I am interested in what clothing represents. And when I say clothing, I also think of a uniform, for example, and that's a new project that Katya and I are developing right now. A uniform for an artist worker, and not an artist diva or artist, I'm going to swipe you off your feet, kind of. So Katya and I, actually, I took a great class that Katya teaches at Sotheby, so if you ever get a chance and if you like fashion and art, take her art and fashion course. It's really, really fascinating. And that was the point that actually inspired me to move beyond fashion and go to the meaning of clothing and of representation, because it's identity.
So Marta, I have two questions for you. One is because you've started to talk a bit about the body as material. If you could maybe walk us through how you came to that point of realizing that you could use your own body, and instead of making a painting where you're using oils, and how you basically approached your own body as something that you could use to make art. And I think I'd like to connect that in some way to where you come from, and to this idea of the uniform. And maybe it's part of what we did talk about earlier. Maybe if you could talk us through some of the choices that you made as you were finding yourself, as you were choosing to educate yourself outside of your own country, you chose another way. If you could elaborate on some of those things, it would be helpful.
Sure. Well, I think how I actually went, let's say, back to the performance or back to using the body, it is because it was more natural to me than painting. I was a classical ballet dancer since very, very young age. So body was my main tool for so many years. And I know body very well, and I know that with the body I can show something that I cannot show with words or in a painting. And I always thought of myself as a very bad painter. And even when I was painting, I would paint bodies because I'm fascinated by human body, by the potential of the human body, by what we can do. And we don't understand what we can do with our body until we either get sick or get too lazy to not be able to move anymore. And when I decided to use body, whether mine or somebody else's in performances, it just clicked. Oh my God, this is what I should have been doing forever. Why did I waste the time before that I haven't been doing it? So, does that answer your question?
And then I'm just curious, when you realized that, how aware were you at that point of someone like Carrie Shane and Hannah Wilby? Did you really know about them when you discovered this moment, or was that something that you've learned more about because you are doing this and people make those connections?
I knew of their work, but I guess as I started doing intensively performance, I would always go back to and look at their work again. Because I think, when you read a book when you're 15, and then you read it again when you're 25, and you read it again when you're 45, you understand it differently. Just because you mature, you know more things, and some things just become very clear to you. And this is exactly what happened to me. Also, when it comes to the feminist part of my work, because a lot of people call my work feminist, and I sometimes agree and sometimes disagree, because I consider myself a bad feminist, if I can say that. I grew up in a family of very strong women. I always thought, poor men, they're the weak sex, because women just had all the power in my family. And I didn't know that in the real world, the outside world, things were not functioning that way. Also in communist Yugoslavia, since 1945, after the war, women were a very precious workforce, so they also had equal rights as men. And, in my house, talking about birth control pill or abortion, was a very natural thing. And my mother, my aunt, and my grandmother, when I came of age, they very openly talked to me about these things. So maybe that's why today, when I know how the real world works, I go back to the big feminist works, and then I realize how powerful they are, actually.
If I can just add in here, I think the other thing that's interesting to me is that, and what's so wonderful about, a younger generation of artists who are quoting or interested in the feminists such as Carolee or Hannah, is that you'll also mix it up with other references such as Helmut Newton, who was, kind of loathed by feminists, and I see things like Bruce Nauman in the makeup pieces. And I wondered if you could say something about that. I think it's really interesting, this concept of bad and good feminist.
Well, I can give you an example of the makeup piece. But as I said, all my works are autobiographical. I exorcise everything I possibly can. The art is like therapy for me because I'm immature, I'm a kid, so through art I try to grow. The makeup piece for me comes from pure frustration. I come from a family, again, strong women, hardcore makeup, and also makeup industry. When I was, let's say, sent to school in the United States, I was supposed to study business. And I was supposed to go back home then after my studies and, take over the family company and be a good businesswoman, which obviously I haven't done. So you see me here tonight talking about something else. But the reason why I used makeup was I wanted to take the frustration off of feeling guilty, or also for not being a part of the family thing. It's incredible how you see things, you read them, you read about them, you learn about them, and then you have them stored somewhere in your mind. And then right after, like 2 or 3 months after I made that piece, I was at the Macro Museum in Rome, where on a huge screen the makeup piece was projected. And I was like, wow, that's totally where ideas are coming from, So,
Piece or Bruce Nauman's makeup?
no, Bruce Nauman's makeup. And I was so impressed how influenced I was by it, not even realizing.
Well, makeup was such a key element in the 1970s women's liberation movement, and obviously it wasn't as acceptable to wear makeup, but I was with Judy Chicago 2 weeks ago, and I was so impressed that when she opened the door in New Mexico, she was fully made up. And it was so amazing to me, because I think what's really much more interesting about the culture we live in today is that, for me, I don't think there is a good and bad feminist. I think you can be a good feminist and wear makeup, and you can maybe like Helmut Newton, and things aren't as strict as it used to be.
I think actually something else to think about in that conversation about makeup is the masquerade and the power of the masquerade. And I have this image continuously playing, and so as you talk about maybe being a bad feminist and not having fulfilled your family's ideals of being educated in the US and then returning to the family business, I see that in this image in particular, you're both masquerading, you put on a wig, and then there's also the presence of a great deal of money, which you are manipulating in a particular way. And so I think it would be interesting to speak specifically about this work, even though the sound is off, we're not hearing it, but having the images run on the loop, it's sort of fascinating to bring that into the discussion.
In 2011, I was invited to participate at the biennial in the Croatian coastal town, Rijeka, which once belonged to Italy. And that was at one point in time conquered by the Italian poet Gabriele D'Annunzio, who was a very controversial character in European history. He practically there created some sort of an independent republic, because he was completely cut off from all the countries around, and he kept the city under siege for 16 months and practically did whatever he wanted. when I was invited to do the piece on him, I realized that in Rijeka, D'Annunzio was not really a loved character. Everyone was ashamed of that part of the history of the town. And that was exactly what had driven me to think about him and to... Because during these 16 months of his ruling in Rijeka, it was his playground. So he would ride his horse naked on the beach together with his artist friends. He asked women to, when they did wear clothes, not to wear skirts and dresses, but to wear pants so they can freely ride the horses. It was some kind of kibbutz, the whole thing, you know, because considering that there was an embargo in the city, they had to figure out, they had to cultivate their own food, cultivate plants for feeding themselves, to raise animals and so on and so forth. So I don't think that people in Rijeka are very proud. Maybe they were just ruled into a sin or something, you know, that now they don't really like to remember. But I think that was a very productive, artistically very productive time for Gabriele D'Annunzio, but also one of the examples of the people who were spending a lot of time there was Marinetti, the father of Futurism, also all the Dada members, you know, so even though we don't know that, Rijeka played a really important role in the intellectual Europe in between the two wars. So, I thought that researching more about the character, I realized that during his 7 years of living in Paris, where he fled from the people that he owed money to in Italy, he practically half of his time lived like a woman. And his alter ego was named Celisette. So this film is actually named after his alter ego. And I thought that it was really interesting. Why I chose that game of genders in this video is because it's always identity. You know, I freak out from any kind of constraints. The moment someone tells me no, or you cannot do that, I know I'm going to do it, no matter what. And I also thought that it was interesting that Gabriele D'Annunzio was an inspiration for Mussolini. He built his super fascist man on some of D'Annunzio's writings, which I thought was ridiculous, you know, because D'Annunzio was bisexual and not very manly as Mussolini would like. So I went to Belgrade to film the film. I shaved my head and was ready to film. In the meantime, I got my family sued me for something really big, and as I said, I put all the autobiographical details in my work. The money that I'm putting in my crotch is a scene that's coming from the following. My lawyer tells me, look, in order to get out of this mess, you need to sell the house, go to the bank, pick up the money, put them in your crotch, and leave the country. And I was really shocked by that. I walked out of his office and I started crying. Like, you know what, I'm not a criminal, why would I have to do something like that? But as we were shooting 2 hours later, you know, I just didn't know what to do with the information that I had, and I put it in the film.
And these cards here, the little transparent.
This sculpture here that you see is my work. It's a transparent resin sculpture at the Museum of Yugoslav History in Belgrade. And it's actually a tomb. It's an identical copy of my family tomb in Belgrade. And when I had placed the sculpture there, we had, in a way, promoted it as a Belgrade landmark. And actually, on one of the prints in the back of this room, you will find the postcards with this sculpture on it. Please, they're all signed. They're little works of art. So please take one. When we're done. Sorry. So these are the magnets for the fridge that you know you can buy in a souvenir shop, like the landmark of the city. So we made little magnets of the tombstone. Yes.
I have a little question, because this is something I was thinking about while we're installing the show and everything, and I was thinking about sexuality, because I was thinking if these works are sexual or not. I think that's something that comes to mind, when you know, you place something in your crotch, you see, you know, you're kind of undressing. But I think, I mean, for me, the interpretation is more like, you know, exposing yourself and you know, dealing with something rather than, you know, the sexual, it is identity, but is sexuality a right word to use here, or would you find a better word?
I don't know if sexuality is the word. Also, didn't one of your gallery clients came here today and didn't want to buy the works because they were not sexy enough or something? They're not sexual enough? I was really delighted that he made that comment because I don't think my work is sexual. I use my body as a tool to give a message or to show more than anything the identity sides. Because I think we all have a lot of identities within ourselves. I'm very complicated when it comes to identity. I grew up in a family in a constant clash between communism and Judaism in the country that doesn't exist anymore, where I didn't even grow up completely because then when I was 14 years old we moved to Israel. Then I studied in America, in Italy. I lived in Italy for almost 10 years altogether and almost 10 years in the States. So I'm kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a mix.
It's funny because now that you say that, it makes me think again about this project that Marta's developing, which I'm kind of involved in, about an art uniform. Because it's, I think the goal of that is this kind of, in a sort of homage to Marinetti and futurism, but this idea of it being worn by people of different cultures in different places and being a kind of standard unisex. It's interesting. Now that you say that, it makes me think a lot about that project.
So maybe thinking back to the question about sexuality and this idea of the uniform, would you say we're not seeing these works as maybe being erotic, or would you say that they're political? And having this perspective that you have regarding identity, how might you talk about these works from a political framework?
I think everything that we do or we don't do is political. You know, Slavoj Žižek, who is one of my favorite contemporary thinkers, he wrote a book on violence, and one of the statements that he makes is that maybe the most dangerous people in terms of violence are those who don't react to violence, who just let it happen, which is what happened, for example, in Nazi Germany. Everyone was obeying the orders. By obeying the orders, you're supporting the system. And this is exactly what is wrong. So I'm very expressive about what I think. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. But when I do have an opinion, just spontaneously comes out. And I don't, that's very also infantile, you know, I don't have the filter. And when I did the performance, May 25th, I had 54 performers in front of the Museum of Yugoslav History on the birthday of Tito, who was the long-time dictator in ex-Yugoslavia. Very soft, very loved dictator, so it's kind of also, I don't know if dictator is the right word. And what happened is that on that day, people from all over ex-Yugoslavia get together. They come to, because it's also, his mausoleum is within the building. It's a huge complex. It used to be the property that he would use for...
The building is defunct now, right?
No, the building is now functional. But I used, yes, it's a museum. But I used a fountain, which was abandoned, but right in front of the museum. And I didn't even realize what effect it's going to happen. But for like 2 years afterwards, I was receiving hate emails. I had all the national TV stations transmitting the performance live. It lasted over 4 hours. And I was so confused by all the publicity. I'm not a public person. I was so confused by all the journalists and everything that was going on. And everyone had interpreted it in a different way. What I wanted to show is that you cannot jump from communism into capitalism overnight, that it takes some training, you know, and that you don't even know what capitalism means, because most of the people who are hardcore capitalists or would like to be so in the region of ex-Yugoslavia, they have never been outside of the country, you know, so they don't even know. They just want something else. So I think you need to be educated in order to make the step ahead. So I wasn't criticizing anyone in particular. I just thought that us as a society, we cannot be silent and obedient. We need to get informed in order to understand, each of us, our history, our present, and our future.
Yeah, because I've been talking to you, and you, I mean, one of the works, Pionica in a Heartbeat, is the video on the left wall over there. It's kind of the connection that you have with former Yugoslavia and with, I guess, the communists or whatever, you know, what you grew up with, and the breathing, you know, the detachment or the identity that involves, you know, the clarity that comes, or the disclarity that comes with the dissolving of the country, of what you know. I'm interested in the notion of failure, you know, and if a failure of a country is a failure of the self because you're so identified with the country or with, you know, what you grew up with and the ideology and the people and the leaders, etc. So it's just so different. I think it's just different from our like democratic countries today. We're like so individual, and this is such a, you know, bodily, you know, it's very physical, the connection. So I'm curious to know about that a little more.
Okay. There were a lot of questions in what you just, is there only one?
You can pick one.
Okay.
Just answer.
Well, Pionica in a Heartbeat, actually, the title of the work, when I was looking at it once I made it, I was thinking, you know, if anybody would have asked me now, where am I from, I would say from ex-Yugoslavia. This is how I identify myself. I'm from an ex-place, from no place. Which is kind of cool, you know? We're talking about globalism. I think one of your questions when I was preparing for the panel was about globalism. So I think I'm a total product of globalism. I don't know if I'm cool with it or that that's great or not, but you know, it's kind of when you're from no place and then you can be anything or nothing. So sometimes I'm everything and sometimes I'm nothing. So I believe that where I was born is automatically in my DNA. So I cannot escape it. I speak, that's my mother tongue, is Serbian, actually Serbo-Croatian, excuse me. The Pionica, for those who don't know, I think it's really important that I explain. The series of 4 photographs over there, you can see the hat that I'm wearing. The hat and the scarf are a part of the uniform that all the children on the first day of school in ex-Yugoslavia would wear. They would wear it with a white shirt, and girls blue skirt and boys blue pants. And it meant that we all belonged to the Communist Party, that we were pioneers, we were the young communists. I also have to explain that we had no clue what that really meant. Maybe I had no clue what that really meant, but that's okay. Because I also am coming from a very particular communist family where my grandfather, who had no word in the family, he was really successful and, you know, doing his thing, very high position in the Communist Party and so on and so forth. But my grandmother was very religious Jew, you know, so at home we were, you know, we were Jewish. But I think that the fact that for 3 years I wore the hat and the scarf really did mean something to me. That I couldn't just forget about it. You know, there are a lot of things, to go back to your question, I'm always ashamed of something. I am ashamed of Yugoslavia or non-Yugoslavia, of ex-Yugoslavia, of Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, and so on and so forth. I'm ashamed of the Balkans, if you want.
Can you read this? I just love this quote, and I think it's so powerful, and it just touches me. I don't know if you...
No, yeah. So this is a quote. It's actually, when I was proposing the project for the Rijeka Biennial, this is exactly what I wrote, and then we put it in the book too, but I'm happy to read it. I'm stating, ashamed of being a child of divorced parents and of a broken and war-torn communist country, ashamed of living in the West, while the West is bombing my country, ashamed of being a poor child in rich countries and of having the opportunities of the rich in the poor countries, ashamed of my communist grandfather and the democratic Jewish grandmother, ashamed of my Pionica photographs from primary school, ashamed of living in the West while my family is struggling in the East, ashamed of the Westerners that don't know where Serbia is, ashamed of classical education as a contemporary artist, ashamed of being an artist, ashamed of never being good enough artist.
You're very Jewish.
Would you say that you're also nostalgic?
You know, I'm not nostalgic at all. Because I think that in core, we're all dreamers. And we always think, oh, it was so great then, or oh, it's so going to be great tomorrow. But it's never that great, you know? So I think we should just live the darn moment. I don't have the time for melancholy. I have the time to elaborate. So I pick up things from my history because I need to kind of digest them. This is where it's coming from. It's also, I've been almost 15 years in therapy, so that's where it's
Maybe someone else has a question. I get to ask you questions all the time.
Sure. I mean, do you want to talk about women in the art market just before we, yeah, because that's something you've raised and I think it's interesting, and also in reference to performance in particular versus the documentation of performance, how does that work and does it work and what does that mean? I mean, are these like new artworks, etc.?
Well, there's a lot in that, but you know, I think with the rise of performance art, obviously there's been this kind of peripheral market that's grown up around it. I mean, obviously some performance artists like Tina Chagall actually sell the performance idea without any written documentation. But obviously we've seen a lot of documentation come of performances. Hannah Wilke, Carolee Schneemann, Rose Vittelsi. I mean, Kath and I can talk a lot about this. Kath is curating a show of Carolee Schneemann's London years. And I think it's really interesting, and there's some people that are, you know, like I think Sean Kelly with the Marina Abramovich Archive, and Anka Kemkes, who is here somewhere, with the work she's doing with feminist historical artists. I think it's a really interesting new position in the art market. I don't really understand it enough yet to say much about it as far as pricing and editions, but the one thing I will say, which I think is very interesting, is that you know, the art market, if you look at it since the kind of first wave of second wave feminism of Carolee Schneemann, of Mary Kelly, it's improved since then, but it's still pretty appalling when you look at the statistics about what women's artist prices are, and also the number of works sold. So I'm very interested in this. I think in some ways it gives young women artists a lot of freedom. As the Guerrilla Girls say, you know, the advantages of being an unsuccessful artist. You don't have to worry about the pressures of success. But seriously, I think the art market is a really interesting place for young women. I'm very positive about it, but I hope it gets better. I don't know if you want to say something. I'm fascinated with this topic, but it's a huge topic.
Well, I think as it intersects with globalism is also something, I mean, Marta comes from a place in which women, because of the communist approach to society, had more of an equal footing, and so I think as the art world becomes more of a globalized sort of activity, that there could even be more shifts that are of benefit to female artists that maybe here in the West they haven't had the full benefit of.
Yeah, and you can't do reverse discrimination. You can't say, okay, we're going to be 50-50, so it's going to work out over time. But it is really fascinating when you see the work of someone like Roman Krausel, the Luxembourgeois economist who crunches numbers about the art market, and his new topic is gender in the art market. And there are so many strong women running galleries, museums, great women artists, but for some reason there's still, I personally believe, and I teach a lot of female students, 90% of my classes are female, and the other day we were talking about curating and the kind of, I wanted them to know kind of the historical landmarks of curating, the Walter Hopps, the Hans Ulrich Obrys, the Harold Seaman, and they said, well, why are there no women? And there are 90% of us, and I said, I'm so glad you're asking that question because you have to become that woman. So, you know, I don't know why, but it's interesting. that people are starting, the whole fact that people are starting to look at things like the distribution of gender in the art market again, I think it's a really interesting time. And then there goes into all the other stuff about, you know, transgender and people who switch assignation of gender, which is fascinating. It gets really messy now. I mean, hopefully someday there'll just be unisex bathrooms.
Martha,
Yeah.
what are you proud of?
Well, you know, I'm also, of all these things that I listed that I'm ashamed of, I'm also very proud of them because they made me who I am today.
I have a question. So I see that a body as a tool in art, very ungrateful, because you cannot detach from aging, from sex. So how do you detach your tool from aging, sex, from mood, from shape?
I don't detach. This is what I have and this is what I use. So in 30 years, when it's going to change dramatically, I will use it in the same way.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think some of the artists who were criticized, like Hanna Wilke, for being beautiful and using their bodies and being titillating, you know, she was making photographs on her deathbed as she was dying of lymphatic cancer. So, but it's a really great question, a really interesting one.
And Hanna Wilke's is a fascinating work because it's not someone's fault how that someone looks. You know, it was not Hanna Wilke's fault that she was very beautiful, and then it was not, nor was her choice nor her responsibility. I am sure that many times she had thought, why the hell am I so beautiful? It would have been so much easier for me if I wasn't. And I also believe that maybe in part that drove her to then produce the Intravenous series when her body was falling apart. And it's a fascinating work to also have a courage to make such a work when you once were such a beautiful woman.
But I also think it goes back to the idea, the radical idea that you don't need to make work as an artist using material that is stable. You know, a paint is stable to some degree, and then you manipulate it and it sits on a canvas. The genius about performance is that you use something that is very unstable and that is constantly evolving. And so the body of the artist ultimately does things and can do things because of that mortality and the changes that occur naturally, that has so much more resonance and so much more power because you let it be what it is, as opposed to trying to control it and not make it be what it is, and not let it grow old.
Yeah, but like if you compare a canvas and the body, I'm just thinking of like body being more ungrateful, sort of, because you can change canvas the way you want, but your body is still there in form that it is, and it will probably stay the way it is.
That's what's fascinating too about reconstruction of performances, such as when Marina Abramovich reconstructed, you know, the 7 easy pieces. It's fascinating also, or even when her own pieces were reconstructed at the MoMA, how it becomes a totally different work. I mean, some people are very against reenacting performances. But I think it's fascinating, especially when artists get other people to reenact their performance. Martha Rosler and Carolee Schneemann did that in London in a Whitechapel series. And it was fascinating to see younger people making the work again. And I thought really beautiful. Maybe we'll re-perform 25th of May.
Maybe. We need to collect 54 people again. That was not an easy task.
What made you want to become a messenger of art? Why did you choose art?
Oh, art chose me. I didn't want to become an artist. I mean, it's a tough life, trust me. Since I was very little, I would be just sitting in my room doing my own thing, drawing or painting or making things, that was freaking out my aunt, especially, who wanted me to study business. My aunt is very hardcore, and she was really freaking out. She told me, you know what? once you graduate from business school, you make a lot of money, then you can do it as a hobby. You don't want to do art otherwise. And but I just didn't trust her somehow, you know. So when I ended up, I went to American University to study business, but in the first 2 weeks I realized that I'm just going to fail all my macroeconomics, microeconomics, accounting, and so on and so forth. So I just took painting, drawing, theater, you know. I said, well, 1 semester, you know, I'm going to get adjusted and then we'll see. And then I never went back to it. So yeah, I didn't really make a choice.
I have a quick question, sort of going back to the idea of the body and the materiality. You're using your body, but you're also using film, you're also using photography, you're also using sculptural elements like in the 2 cases. So maybe it's also interesting to talk about how you choose your media and how you deploy in any given situation your means of communicating.
It depends on what I'm working on, you know, because now with the uniform project, what is it going to be? Is it going to be a performance? Is it going to be a lifestyle? Is it going to be, is the documentation of it going to, because, okay, shortly, the uniform project, we're going to create uniforms, and many people around the world, across the continent, different cultures, they're all going to wear it. And they're going to wear it on a different time periods. Some for several months, some for several years.
Is it just people in the art world?
Just people in the art world. It's an art uniform, yeah. Because, you know, I'm an artist and I belong to the art world, even though I'm not always happy with that, or I'm super happy sometimes, it depends, you know, I shift from one to another. But I think that we do have a very strong community, in which, though, there is very little will for any kind of equality. It's a fierce competition. Vita mia, morte tua, you know, your death, my life. And I don't really like that. Wouldn't we, as art community, especially because our paths were not easy in most of the cases, wouldn't you expect more fraternity or more support?
Earlier you said that if somebody tries to constrain you, you immediately rebel against it and go the other way. So I'm just curious to know whether you predict that there could be some complications in trying to get the art world to wear a uniform.
Of course.
Well, it's specific people in the art world as well. It's like a museum director in Belgrade, they're different, and another performance artist, male and female, but the idea is we'll wear it every day for a certain amount of time. So you'll be seeing it. You'll see it on it. But
Actually, in order to discipline myself ahead of time, I sold like more than half of my closet, and I'm selling the other half. So by the time that the uniform is going to be ready for me, that's the only thing I will have in my closet, so I will have nothing else to wear.
This is a good time to kind of wrap it up. With some curiosity, I mean, I think there's so many things where, you know, we touched so many things in this conversation, and so many things are left open for you to kind of think about and investigate and see the show. So we're going to have, you know, some refreshments in the next hour, and I want to thank our panelists. Thank you, Kathleen Madden. Thank you, Kathy Battista. And thank you, Marta Jovanović. And thank you all.
I really have to thank, from the bottom of my heart, Bosy Contemporary team, because besides the fact that we are on their premises, Bosy Contemporary has been unselfishly supporting my work 100% in every possible situation. I'm not talking only about the book, I'm not talking only about the show, I'm talking about all the performances and all the artistic endeavors that seemed so incredibly crazy before they were executed. So without Bosy Contemporary, even I wouldn't be here. So thank you, Bosy Contemporary. Thank you, Naomi.